I think it's quite clear from what we saw on October 1st that the Iranians have the ability to penetrate Israel's defenses. So if they launch a couple hundred missiles and then they launch another couple hundred missiles, almost all of them are going to get through. And if they target them at certain places, could do one heck of a lot of damage. And the problem here, Judge, is that you're going up the escalation ladder. And the question you always want to ask yourself is, what's the next step? And who wins going up the escalation ladder?
But do you think that Netanyahu asks himself that?
I don't know. I honestly don't know what the Israelis are thinking. I think the Israelis, as I've said before, are in deep, deep trouble. They've not defeated Hamas. They've not defeated Hezbollah. And I think they don't have escalation dominance over Iran. And Iran can pound them just as much as Israel can pound Iran. And you have to ask yourself, in that situation, who wins? How do you tell a happy story for Israel at this point in time? How do you tell a happy story for Gaza, for the war against Hezbollah, and a war against Iran? I just don't see how you do it.
John Mearsheimer presents a sobering analysis of the growing tensions between Israel and Iran, emphasizing the dangerous potential for escalation. His concerns aren't just about the immediate damage from missile strikes, but about the unpredictable consequences of further escalation. Let's break down Mearsheimer's critical points, including the effectiveness of Iran's missile capabilities, Israel's vulnerabilities, and the risks of escalation leading to a broader, regional war that could spiral out of control. Mearsheimer highlights that Iran's missile capabilities are no longer hypothetical. Their ability to penetrate Israeli defenses was clearly demonstrated in the October 1st incident, where Iran successfully targeted military bases in Israel. Despite Israel's sophisticated defense systems, such as the Iron Dome and David's Sling, these missile shields aren't foolproof. Iran's growing missile arsenal includes advanced precision-guided missiles that pose a serious challenge to Israel's defense systems. When faced with hundreds of missiles launched in quick succession, Israel's missile defense could easily become overwhelmed. Once key military installations are hit, the consequences could cripple Israel's ability to respond effectively, with widespread damage affecting not only military power but also economic stability and national morale. One of the central themes of Mearsheimer's analysis is the concept of the escalation ladder. In military conflicts, once the initial strikes are exchanged, the risk of further escalation becomes the driving concern. The question is no longer about how much damage the first wave of attacks causes, but what happens next. If Israel continues its attack on Lebanon, Iran will undoubtedly retaliate. The concern here, as Mearsheimer points out, is the potential for escalation to spin out of control. What if Israel targets deeper into Iranian territory, hitting critical infrastructure or nuclear sites? In turn, Iran might escalate by targeting Israeli cities or even U.S. military bases in the region. The danger is that each side, unwilling to back down, could escalate further until there's no turning back. At a certain point, the conflict could involve the use of nuclear weapons, something both Israel and Iran could potentially acquire. The stakes are extraordinarily high, and Mearsheimer's warning is clear. Once the escalation ladder is in play, it becomes harder and harder to stop. Mearsheimer questions whether Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has fully considered the risks associated with this type of escalation. Netanyahu, known for his hardline stance on Iran, has long viewed Iranian influence in the region as a direct threat to Israel's existence. His decision to attack Lebanon, resulting in the death of Hezbollah leader Hassan Nasrallah, has only added fuel to the fire. But is Netanyahu truly prepared for what comes next? Mearsheimer argues that Israel doesn't have what's called escalation dominance over Iran. While Israel possesses considerable military strength, including nuclear weapons, so does Iran. Both countries have the ability to cause immense damage, but neither can ensure a swift, decisive victory. This uncertainty makes Netanyahu's approach a high-stakes gamble. Is he betting that the United States will intervene on Israel's behalf, tipping the balance in their favor? Or is he counting on Iran being unable to withstand the pressure? Mearsheimer suggests that without clear answers to these questions, Israel is walking a precarious line. What makes this conflict particularly dangerous is Iran's capacity for retaliation. In previous decades, Israel may have been able to strike Iran with little fear of significant retribution. But today, that's no longer the case. Iran has spent years building up its missile arsenal, and it can strike back at Israel just as effectively as Israel can strike Iran. The situation is further complicated by Iran's influence over proxy groups like Hezbollah, which operates out of Lebanon and has its own vast stockpile of rockets. If Hezbollah were to join the conflict, Israel would find itself fighting on multiple fronts, dividing its resources and attention. This would create even greater strain on Israel's defenses and increase the likelihood of serious casualties and damage. In this scenario, neither side can gain a clear upper hand, creating a dangerous stalemate where both sides can inflict heavy losses, but neither can win outright. A full-scale war between Israel and Iran would have consequences far beyond these two nations. Mearsheimer suggests that such a conflict could easily spread across the Middle East, dragging in other regional actors. Groups like Hezbollah and Hamas would likely launch their own attacks on Israel, while Iran could target U.S. assets in the region. This would quickly become a multi-front war, with Israel facing threats from Lebanon, Gaza, and possibly even Syria. The strain on Israeli forces would be immense, and the region as a whole would be plunged into chaos. The economic and political fallout would be felt far beyond the battlefield, with oil markets disrupted, refugee crises exacerbated, and alliances tested. For the broader Middle East, a war of this magnitude would be devastating. The loss of life, destruction of infrastructure, and long-term instability could set the region back by decades. One of the most tragic aspects of any conflict is the impact on civilians, and a war between Israel and Iran would be no different. The humanitarian consequences would be catastrophic, particularly for the people of Gaza, who are already living under dire conditions. Israeli airstrikes in Gaza have already caused widespread destruction, and a broader war would likely lead to even more suffering. Mearsheimer's question, "How do you tell a happy story for Gaza or Israel?" speaks to the grim reality of this conflict. Civilians on both sides would bear the brunt of the fighting. In Israel, families would live under the constant threat of missile attacks, while in Gaza, the already fragile humanitarian situation would deteriorate even further. There's no happy ending in sight for the civilians caught in the middle of this conflict. The international community would likely scramble to provide aid, but the scale of the disaster would be overwhelming. As John Mearsheimer points out, the escalating conflict between Israel and Iran is fraught with peril. The risks of this confrontation spiraling into a broader regional war are real and growing. Netanyahu's gamble, combined with Iran's demonstrated capabilities, could lead to a situation that neither side can control. The key question remains, who benefits from this escalation? Mearsheimer's answer is bleak. In a war of this scale, there are no winners, only immense losses on all sides. The human toll, the destruction of infrastructure, and the long-term instability that would follow such a conflict make it clear that diplomacy, not war, is the only viable solution. But with both sides digging in and tensions continuing to rise, the path to peace seems increasingly difficult. The world watches as Israel and Iran inch closer to a conflict that could reshape the Middle East for decades to come. According to John Mearsheimer, I think it's quite clear from what we saw on October 1st that the Iranians have the ability to penetrate Israel's defenses. If they launch a couple of hundred missiles and then follow up with another couple hundred, most of them are going to get through. If they target certain places, they could cause significant damage. The problem here is that you're climbing the escalation ladder, and the critical question you have to ask is, what's the next step, and who wins as you escalate further? Does Netanyahu ask himself that? I don't know. Honestly, I'm not sure what the Israelis are thinking. As I've said before, I believe the Israelis are in deep, deep trouble. They haven't defeated Hamas, and they haven't defeated Hezbollah. And I don't think they have escalation dominance over Iran. Iran can hit back just as hard as Israel can hit Iran. In that situation, you have to ask, who wins? How do you tell a positive story for Israel in this scenario? How do you tell a happy story for Gaza? A war against Hezbollah and a war against Iran? I just don't see how you do it. Thanks for watching.